Welcome to this next breakout session. We have a great topic for you today. We're going to be discussing measuring success in social media. We have a fantastic panel. My name is Brian Thome. I lead the Insights team for LinkedIn's marketing solutions business. With me today we have John Bell, who is the Global Managing Director at Social at Ogilvy. Mike Volpe, who is the CMO from Hubspot. Paul Marcum, who is, sorry Paul, I'm going to mess up your title here.
Something or other.
The Director of Global Digital Marketing at GE, and Phil Parrotta, who is the Head of Brand at Oppenheimer Funds. So thank you all for joining us today. Why don't we, to kind of get started, just have each of you take a minute or so to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about your roles, and we'll go ahead and start with you, John.
Sure. So I run a team called Social at Ogilvy, which is, excuse me, it's Ogilvy's global practice for social media that stretches across all of our disciplines. And the reason why that's kind of important, it'll speak to or frame up my point of view on measurement in a minute, because we are very much focused on integrated social media, meaning that owned, earned, paid works together in a practical way, not just in a buzzy word way. Discipline expertise comes together, so CRM and social and so forth and so on. And those all have an effect on how we have measurable outcomes. And so when we get diving into some of the kind of arcane issues about measurement, which you guys are also, this is the smart group, right? I don't know what's in the other room over there, but we can talk about that. I think one of the big challenges that I'll throw out there and then let others continue is that, and I heard it in the last session, so there was a little bit of talk about measurement, and I think Richard says, we was saying, we put an emphasis on business value, not on ROI, and I totally agree with that. However, I think we are all working towards ROI models, and we'll inevitably do so. ROI is more of an operational idea. Whether we like to admit it or not, are still in the innovation and early days of what we're doing. I mean, I'm not trying to, age myself here, but having specifically been trying to, wrestling with this for 7 years, that's not a long time in the social side of things, at least. So, anyhow, that's enough out of me.
Great.
I'm Mike Volpe, Chief Marketing Officer at Hubspot. We're a B2B software company, and we actually sell to marketers. And because we're also a startup, we've been around for 5-6 years now. So being a startup, you think small budgets, you're trying to get things off the ground. So we are very, very, very focused on revenue, customer acquisition, and we're also, out of the original team of sort of 8 or 10 people that started the company, I think 6 or 7 had MIT degrees, and so we are extremely analytical, and almost everything we do, we tie it back in terms of what the ROI is, and try to measure all of it as accurately as we can, which is not always 100% accurately, but I think we do try to drive down to hardcore numbers and dollars and cents for everything that we do.
Right. Paul Marcum, Director of Global Digital Marketing for GE. GE, as you are probably quite aware, is very much a B2C and a B2B marketer. And a large part of what we do is a lot of storytelling and brand building around both segments. And they take on quite different shapes. And as part of this embrace of social that we've undertaken in the last 2 years, we've, of course, recognized our companies, it feels like the country sometimes, our companies' value set, which is always, of course, that of rigorous numerical scrutiny. And suffice to say, going and saying that we're going to go start tweeting to somehow grow sales of jet engines has prompted a question about how we're doing this, what we're doing, and how to move forward. And so we've done a tremendous amount of work in terms of understanding what the opportunities are for us in this space, and excited to discuss them with you today.
Okay, so wait, before you go on, I've just tweeted out that you see GE as a country. Is that okay? Only kidding. Only kidding.
It's probably larger than most countries.
Well, 320,000 employees. Let's not get into the GDP, but yeah.
Right. Over to Phil.
My name is Phil Parrotta. I'm the head of brand integrated marketing and advertising at Oppenheimer Funds. Before I get started, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our head of social, Jacob Rothschild, who's actually helped the fact that we can even be on this panel today. We're relatively in our infancy stage, I think, some of my panelists here. what I do is basically direct sort of the way the firm smells, eats, tastes, interacts with our clients, and sort of the integration of all of our promotional and merchandising activity. Social being a major part, or playing much more of a part in that integration strategy, mostly in terms of content syndication and amplifying our voice within the marketplace. Interesting that I'm on a panel about measurement and ROI, because we are a heavily regulated industry, B2B sold, with impact, positive impact, we hope, on the investor or the C of B2C. And so trying to get that value, or trying to show how we get to a sale, is much more difficult, because even our audience, which is largely a bit older, if we're talking about our actual intended client, our advisors, they tend to skew a little older. They are just really dabbling in the social sphere and trying to figure out how to use it in order to gain clients. And so it's been an interesting journey for us, but one that we feel that we're relatively progressive in the space within our category.
Great. Thank you guys for the introductions. To get things started, why don't we, maybe you could each talk a little bit about what your company is doing in social today, some of the objectives that are top of your list that you're driving towards, and how what your framework is for measuring that, or your point of view around measurement. Phil, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Sure. So we're doing pretty much the usual. We are on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube, and we're now actually blogging, which is also great. So for us, that's a pretty big sphere, and outside of advertising, that's something that we sort of control. Framework is a little different. We don't have a framework per se. We structure our programs around the audience, the content, and what they're saying. We know varying degrees of information within those three categories. We know obviously who we're trying to go after. We just don't know whether or not we're actually reaching them, because it's what I think as marketers we hunger for is some sort of device or service that allows us to aggregate all of these social and business personas into one place and really gain some insight into who these individuals are. So that's trying to get a handle on that. Around the content, we have taken a stance, as many in our industry, I think, about being thought leaders, trying to add value for our investors and for our clients. And so we see the social sphere as a place where we can amplify that content. And so we're measuring and looking at what we're producing, how it's being consumed, what is resonating, and I say that in the context of amplification, so what people are sharing, so to speak. And then ultimately, what they're saying, which is a little bit more of a black hole. We listen, but we've taken the approach of figure out our strategy, put out our content, use it as an amplification tool, and then build out our listening. So we listen a little in the sense of we could probably be doing more, but what do we do with that information? So integrating that data back into systems that we can actually cull through and find usable is a different challenge. So it's great, we can listen all we want, but if we don't, or we're not able to act on that content, we're taking baby steps in that area. And I would think, and it'll be interesting to hear whether or not the other panelists share that sort of challenge.
So we've created what we basically call a content factory, and we're always with that trying to either support a dialogue, tell our story, allow ourselves to be defined in the space, or to, as many of us, provide some thought leadership, and we do that through pretty much every dominant social platform that's out there. And every time we look at a new platform, we look at it with a slightly different lens. Some of it's audience-driven, some of it's, of course, form-driven. But so, for example, we'll look at Facebook and say, well, that could be GE at its most accessible, and whether it's CRM or just the always-on response strategy that we've employed, we think that that's what we're able to provide as a simple value prop there. When we look at something that's a video program, we look at GE at its either most visually spectacular or at its most evocative, and kind of up and down the line of whatever program we're working on. And in terms of measurement, well, we're always looking to convert in one of two ways: convert as an advocate or convert as a sale. And we ultimately I think the biggest challenge, I'm sure we'll get into this, the biggest challenge with a lot of that is attribution at this point, but ultimately you're able in so many other ways to understand how successful you are in supporting that dialogue and leading through opinion or managing to actually define yourself and tell the story, and that's very much our kind of day-to-day routine.
And Paul, could you talk a little bit about, maybe give an example of some of the ways that you have tried to or have been able to get at attribution from different programs? And
yeah, I think that cards up, B2B is really hard right now, and I think the best promise we have for this is what you guys are doing and what Salesforce is doing to provide greater tools that track your engagement with a specific customer over time. And while I haven't seen a formula that distills it down to it was that one tweet that made them buy the gas turbine, but if somebody's got that, and we're all ears. But you can certainly see where the touch points are, and you can begin to map that out and collect that and have visibility into it on an ongoing basis. And I think that's where you start to understand where there's a deeper opportunity. On consumer, some of the models that we've explored have been a little bit more adept, but ultimately I think attribution over time is still a big challenge and will be a big challenge moving forward.
Do you offer tours of the content factory? Because I think I can tour like the turbine factory, right, or like the airplane engine factory. I would love to tour the content factory you guys have.
Well, I think we'd be happy to take you on a tour. Yeah, I think, but it's that same metaphor, right?
Yeah.
We're looking to do the same thing with content.
It sounds cool. And so for us, I think maybe it's a little bit different because we're not the size of a small or a large country, and the company was only started 5-6 years ago, and I was the 5th employee. So we had, in many ways, the luxury of not having to deal with any existing infrastructure. And so we took the entire marketing playbook and just threw it out the window. And my first day on the job, I wrote and then published a blog article. And that was like the marketing that I did that day. And so I think in many ways, we're just very lucky that we're starting from scratch. And so for us, our framework is that we completely focus on inbound marketing. And that means a couple things, which is why I'm interested in the Content Factory, is creating lots of content that's targeted toward the personas that you're trying to attract to your business. And then we also think a lot about trying to track and understand the context of all the different relationships and interactions that you're having with people. So trying to understand both in terms of when you're sending someone an email, well, have they read 30 of your blog articles? Maybe the content of that email should be a little bit different. If they're coming back to your website for the 4th or 5th or 6th visit and they've already downloaded a couple of your webinars or something like that, then the information that you're displaying on your website should probably be a little different. So it's really the interplay for us of the content and the context that we try to use to attract more people to us. And we try to think about everything that we do. What are we doing to make our marketing more inbound, more and more people coming to us, as opposed to trying to push that message out to them. Because not to quote everyone on every single panel for the whole day, but the customer's in control now. I don't know if you guys heard that before, right? But some of the ways that we try to make that actionable is we try to think about all of our marketing sort of drawing people into us as opposed to us sort of going out to them. And then in terms of measurement and attribution, we do measure everything down to, for the time and effort that we spent in marketing, and actually people's salaries and like all of that overhead, the office space, all that. We actually take the numbers from finance and we use that to get to a customer acquisition cost. We compare that to the lifetime value of customers. So we're pretty detailed in all those metrics. The interesting part, you were talking about attribution, we try to focus on first touch attribution. So we're a B2B sale. I'm sure it's a faster process. We're kind of 60 to 90-day sales process, probably faster than buying an airline engine, I would assume, yeah. But for us, it's still a considered sales process. There's many, many touch points along that. And we try to track everything back to the first touch. So that could be a tweet and then they visited our website and maybe they left and maybe they came back a couple weeks later. But through all of our analytics, we try to track things back to the first touch. And by doing that, we actually see a lot of attribution to social and to our blog and to other things that we're doing of actual revenue dollars. Usually the last touch is a salesperson or an email or something like that. But again, if you're doing last touch attribution, I think you're overemphasizing those channels. So that's one thing that's worked well for us in terms of attribution.
That's great. And do you see different channels and different influences at different parts of that process, or are they all kind of taking place throughout the whole sales?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the blog is something that does well sort of throughout the whole process. For us, it does seem like social is much more at the very top of the funnel. It's something where, at least for us in our business model and the way that we use social and our market, it seems like it's much more of a discovery, and sort of because there's so much sharing in social, we get a lot of new people hearing about the company that way. It's also partly probably because we're sort of a new and emerging brand versus some of the other folks up here that have much more of sort of a larger presence, and probably you guys have heard of those names more than you've heard of HubSpot. So for us, social does really well at the beginning. Email and then obviously conversations with the sales team tend to kind of be overweighted toward the end.
Sure. So just in summary, there's 7 big solutions that we sell or that we bring to our clients' business. One is social business solutions, which is what it sounds like. It's consultative, and the metrics of success are more about more operational metrics inside the company. One is social media marketing and communications. Admittedly, a big flexible umbrella that probably describes much of what many of us in the room do. But it also does include social CRM, for which metrics like lifetime customer value now added, not just the kind of repurchase value, but also the advocacy value of customers becomes an issue. Social shopping, which is obviously, ultimately also does come down to customer value, but also transaction and conversion things. So we have 7 solutions, and they're all a little bit different. And obviously, the clients that we're working with, the measurement models that we're applying to each are going to be different. So Nestle is a client of ours in many parts of the world. I work with Pete Blackshaw, who is kind of the chief digital and social officer there in Volpe. And I would say, most of the work we're doing is in the social media Marcum space, but also social customer care, or consumer relations in their vernacular. And so they're most interested in, I would actually say not brand metrics in their particular case, but relationship metrics, and now new advocacy metrics, because they've, like a lot of the consumer brand clients that we work with, but also actually quite a few of our B2B brands, they've now adopted some form of advocacy, word of mouth, earned media, whatever you want to call it. I mean, they're not all the same, but they've adopted that as a value, even if they haven't precisely put a value on each piece of it. So what we do for them would be measured one way. What we do with IBM, we were talking about IBM earlier, and IBM's kind of social business strategy around putting the experts out there and building the digital eminence of experts. And so they may have a lot of, quite frankly, visibility metrics, about whether or not, Bob or Sally are showing up high for virtualization or whatever the, term is that they need to be the owned expert on, and then whether or not you can track that down into lead gen. So a perfect example is a program we did with LinkedIn, quite frankly, in India with IBM a year or so ago. It was a program hosted by the CFO of IBM India, who essentially, and for all intents and purposes, created a self-help group, a support group for CFOs in India, wrestling with business issues. A lot of the activity, the community discussion, and dialogue happened on LinkedIn. There were events as well, but we drove that all the way down to lead gen value and actual sales. $17 million worth of sales from that particular activity. Never mind the lead gen value. So there's a client who's very interested down into a B2B conversion metric. So what we did, because measurement was one of our big 7 solutions. We've been wrestling with this, as many of you are for quite a few years, is create an open model. I'd send you all, any of you, the slides today. I think any kind of black box model is inane. Just doesn't make any sense. I don't think you would trust a black box model, or anyone would. But essentially, yes, I know the funnel's dead, but for all intents and purposes, if we think about the customer journey, let's put it in a nicer term, from discovery all the way through, we organize KPIs, key performance indicators, around awareness, preference, and action, whatever the action is defined. And I think the newest piece of that, and the one that many of you are probably wrestling with as well, is in the preference space, in the middle, where we're actually using listening tools, as many of you are out there, to understand, did we increase share of voice, sentiment, et cetera, and so forth, all the way down to recommendations, something a little bit more directive. And I would say in that model, The two big lessons learned for us, and you may all say, oh, duh, this is obvious, but sometimes that's where the best lessons come from, is it wasn't about coming up with a new social GRP or anything like that, because again, I'm not a big fan of that approach. It was about acknowledging that what we really needed to do was figure out and distinguish the few KPIs, 3 or 4 KPIs on any typical program that mattered, divorce them or separate them from the 25 diagnostic metrics in our language, just all those little itty-bitty numbers, and know that we're reporting against those KPIs. And yet those diagnostics are good for me and the geeks behind the scenes to know how to move the levers up and down, or hope to, on the KPIs. But get out of this, we can measure and report so much. I mean, I don't know if anybody's had this problem, but you do a measurement framework for a client, and there's freaking 35 numbers on there, and you're recording and reading out to the brand manager about comments and shares and object likes and stuff like that. That's crazy talk. So the lesson learned there is to be disciplined about defining the KPIs, separating them out, and then also some of it's back to basics, or what Pete would say is back to boring. It's like, we can do sales attribution. It's called marketing impact because we come up with names for everything, right? And all it does is it's us connecting to other data sources like sales data and coming up with reporting models that are perfectly good, but unfortunately not hugely scalable, right? So you can only do these things in little pilots, so to speak, to prove out models. We haven't quite operationalized it yet. So a lot of the things we do to report in that measurement model I described are things like pre and post surveys. And we can do them on LinkedIn as much as we can do them out in other parts of the world as well. And so the last thing I'll say, because attribution is a key thing that people wrestle with, is that first of all, I think last clicks attribution is not worth doing. I think it's just a misleading thing. There was a report recently which kind of, in some ways, diminished the impact of social because it was based upon a last click model. That just doesn't make any sense. We did a great study last year for quick service restaurants. We worked with Chat Threads, which is a great company for reporting, and they have self-reporting tools that people use about what they come in contact with and so forth. And what it did for us is it really revealed what we care about most, which is the integrated value of social media, not standalone. And we found all these great combinations, social media plus out of home, and a big, kind of surprise between social media and radio for some reason in that particular category. And those of you in there know what that's about. And that's the valuable kind of exploration that I think we need to be doing today.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit more about the KPIs that you're focusing on, and what are the 3 or 4 that are they always the same, or are they different depending on the objective, and how are they different from the operational metrics?
So the simplest way for me to answer that is that there's always 2 categories of information in combination. One is a reach number, because we do care about the pool of people we're touching or engaging or whatever, and then some type of either positioning goal. Oh yes, now we understand that they're associating technology with Ford because of how they're talking out there in the marketplace and how they're searching for stuff. So there's positioning. There's preference. Again, are they showing a positive sentiment and or intention to purchase? And that's again detected from what they're saying and doing out there in the marketplace. And then action. So it's reach plus one of those. I mean, that's kind of common sense. I'm not really telling you anything. But any of those other 3 things without knowing what the pool of people is that you've touched doesn't really make any sense. So the KPIs are usually a reach number and 1 or 2 numbers that reflect whichever one of those 3 things that you're doing.
Great, thank you.
I mean, for us, metrics-wise, everything comes down to revenue, right? And I think for us, it's like, okay, revenue and new customers, and then things that start to go from outside of that that are hopefully predictive of that and lead to that. So obviously, new customers, revenue is huge. And then from there, it's like, okay, well, the number of leads that we pass to the sales team, number of opportunities created, perhaps even like a step before that is like number of visitors to the website, things like that. For us, we'll also look a little bit at things that we think lead to those things. So it could just be new contacts acquired into our database that are opt-in. It could even be things like new followers, because I actually think someone that's paying attention to your company page on LinkedIn or following you in another social network, that's almost like opting into your database because they're giving you permission to communicate with them. For us, we don't really care or track reach. I think maybe it's because we've never done anything on radio or TV or any of those types of things. So I think some of it is just sort of our mentality. But I also think the notion of and I'd be curious what some other folks have to say about this. But reach. I mean, you look at some of these posts on certain networks, and it's like, oh, this reached 10 million people, and it's like, well, was that someone on a mobile device doing this, right? And does that really count as reach if they just kind of scrolled right past it? Versus reach in the old days of oh, well, this person sat in front of a TV, they didn't have a DVR, and they probably saw the ad if they weren't going to the kitchen to get a soda or something, right? So I just think the notion of what those numbers really mean, for me personally, being a quantitative MIT guy, and actually being probably much more of a quantitative person than a marketer, for us and for our business, what we're trying to accomplish, it's not as important for us.
Yeah, but I would argue that you can't divorce reach as a framing KPI for the other things. I'm not saying you should. I agree with you that 9 times out of 10, if all you're thinking about is reach in the social space, you're probably not going to get the value you're looking for. But if you don't know the pool of people that you've reached, I don't know, synonym here, I'm trying to come up with a good one, but if you don't know the pool of the people you've reached and then driven a behavior on the other side, I think it's tough to understand the efficacy of your work overall. I mean, so think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say it's if so you sold $10 million worth of stuff, and maybe you talked to 100,000 people, or maybe you talked to 1,000 people. In some ways, the 1,000 people is actually better because it was less time and effort to get that through sort of the sales process, right? Now, again, on this, it's well, maybe you had more exposure to more people, but if they didn't act upon it, I'm not sure how much I really care,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I agree, but
yeah. It's also sort of a little bit of a philosophical difference too, I think, because you work with some very, very large brands that have gigantic budgets, and some of them have this really long considered sales process, like you brought up IBM. Other ones, depending on the line of business, like Nestle, it's well, are you really going to track someone that clicked on a tweet and then went to the Nestle website and then downloaded a coupon and then went to the store and bought a candy bar or something, versus they did something cool and then they walked into the store. It's I think you're dealing with the extra level of complexity that maybe I'm not.
it's possible.
Do you have no? Okay.
You're both wrong. No, I think, which KPIs, I mean, it depends, right? I'll tell you our approach. Obviously, we're dealing with reputation, we're dealing with commercial. I think for us, we come up with different layers depending on the organization. And to echo John's point, you can't sit there and say that everybody should be looking at the number of tweets per or the number of comments or likes or whatever it is per post in some platform here or there. But if your goal is always action, to make all of these metrics actionable, you quickly realize that every layer within your organization requires a different set of metrics and a different set of KPIs. And what is appropriate to share with our CMO, with Beth Comstock, is a wrapper that sits on top of, in our case, we pull in every metric through a series of APIs, we put it in a custom dashboard, and she gets presented with a cost per model that takes what we're spending and maps that against our mobile initiatives versus our social versus our digital content, everything. So she's got a really good sense of what's most efficient. And she can make decisions based on that and provide guidance based on that. And that level's one thing. What Linda Boff, who's my boss, oversees all advertising and digital and design for GE, what she wants to see is very much similar to what Beth wants to see, but she's willing to go a little bit more granularly and understand specific programs and how they've behaved versus different audience segments. Different offers that may have resonated with one particular segment, one particular program. In my case, it's very much visibility into a lot of the kind of the likes and the engagement metrics and some of the specifics as we try to understand what programs are actually going to work. And then frankly, the rung below me, the guys who are actually operating a lot of these programs, they're spending probably half the time in our custom dashboard and then half the time nested within Google Analytics or Facebook metrics or LinkedIn or whatever it may be, really understanding the day-to-day performance of that vehicle. And then you have another group that's probably looking at Salesforce and then Marketo now, and just kind of. So I think that the key thing is just to recognize that whatever you're doing with metrics is you have to make it actionable. You have to be able to not get so buried that you're not able to decide what you need to do and lose sight of what your job is within the organization and how you're going to make a change.
Great. Can you guys talk a little bit about some of the current challenges you're facing, or maybe recent challenges you guys have just overcome, or John, in your case, things that you're working through with different clients that are top of mind right now?
The biggest thing that I'll throw out there, and many of you may be wrestling with this, would be great to hear when we get to Q&A, but okay, so we've all paid, owned, and earned, right? Okay, so getting beyond the buzz phrase of paid, owned, and earned as an intention of like, don't those things work well together and compound the effects when you put them together? And the answer is generally yes, and I believe it based upon evidence and also just intuition and whatever. But reporting out the performance efficacy of a program, we don't like to think in terms of campaigns, but whatever, a defined program about how our paid advertising efforts are purely owned content, performed or owned content. I'm trying to think if there's another example. There's not. And all types of the earned media, from the kind of long tail word of mouth or even more traditional interpretations from the public relations discipline of earned media, how that performed. That's coming up with that dashboard. Coming up with the phase 2 version of that dashboard is the thing that we're struggling right now. The phase 1 dashboard, of course, is that you just create a mosaic of these things, in a dashboard that we all are probably capable of doing and have in our suite, and puts them all in one view, but doesn't show relationships between them. I think the thing we're struggling now with is the phase 2 version that does show a dashboard, implicit in a dashboard is that it's updated routinely. It's not a once a year report, and coming up with that version is the thing that we're currently wrestling with a lot of clients right now, and I know a lot of big brands, IBM and Nestle, those guys again specifically, and Ford is consciously wrestling with this right now. So that'd be the one thing that I would throw out there.
Well, I would just say you're absolutely right. I think you quickly realize that a bunch of dials on a screen for a dashboard a certain. It looks great for like a week, and then you realize, well, I never use that. Why don't I use that? And I think for us, it is the way we're solving for that, and this is a daily thing, and we make changes on as a frequent basis as possible to actually update this, is that we're going after use cases, and it's not such a formal way of perhaps doing it, but we're focusing on pilot programs, both at the corporate level, but then also nested within the businesses that are solving for fundamental questions, and it's a different orientation which gets you past the there's the Twitter dial, the Facebook dial, the whatever dial, and into what that combination is going to look like that will help you work through that process. But that's tough, and scalability in that regard can be challenging as well. But I still would not go back to the alternative of agency sends me a PDF on a Friday and tells me how the last 2 weeks went, and oh yeah, okay, maybe I'll open that, maybe I won't. We're going to talk about it at some point, and I think that model is difficult to endorse.
For us, you got to start with you got to begin with the end in mind, right? And for us, it really is figuring out how to take this environment and make it valuable for our clients. And And clients I'm using sort of with a double meaning, investors at the end, but largely our day-to-day client is a financial advisor. And so they're struggling. They know they need to be there. They know they need to use these tools. They are getting business from them. They're surprised that they are getting business from them, but they are excited by it. They're just not sure how to optimize it. And they look to partners like us to figure out or help them add value to their end client. So for us, some of the difficulties is just what do we put out there and how do we make it meaningful? How do we help them help themselves, so to speak? I think that's one challenge that we are growing through. And I also think, a theme that I'm listening to is challenging ourselves to look at metrics in a different way, right? A case in point, not necessarily directly related to this, but we were having a conversation around a rich media unit, and someone said, oh, well, our click-throughs to the site are down. And I said, yeah, so what? And they said, well, that's a metric of success. And I said, well, are engagement levels up? Are they actually reading and clicking on the things that are in the rich media unit? Our goal isn't to actually take them off the site. Our goal is to make a really positive in-app experience, which means the person wants to get the information they want and then go back to where they started, right, so to speak. And so for us, it's less about getting to a sale because you can't really transact with us in a public domain. So challenging ourselves as marketers to really understand and not hold ourselves necessarily accountable to old forms of metrics, I think, will be interesting as we go forward, and what does that mean for us? So those are some pitfalls that we're working through and challenges that I think are interesting for us.
I think you hit a great point. The legacy of existing KPIs from the old digital world was like yesterday, where, is really quite surprising. We have to be careful, and the most noticeable one is the one you mentioned, which is traffic to our branded site. If you're an e-com site, there's no question, obviously, that's likely to be a KPI. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be a KPI, but it's certainly one of those ones you should, like you did in your example, say, yeah, I don't know if that's the one we should stay so married to.
Yeah, along those same lines, we've been hearing a lot today around the importance of social in building relationships, creating experience, sort of longer-term engagements with clients and audiences and people. A lot of our metrics that we use today are very transactional focused. They're oriented around a campaign. They're oriented around a specific part of the marketing process. How are you guys thinking about the evolution of that towards new metrics, or do we need new metrics? Can we use these old metrics in social?
I don't think we necessarily need new metrics. You just need to have better insights into. So I'll give an example. The value of word of mouth is one that we all take it for granted, and we hear it all the time. And we were sitting in a conversation with a media partner, in this case BuzzFeed, and that was represented, and we just kind of all scratched our head and said, "Has anyone actually mapped that yet? What is the value of word of mouth? What's the value of a social inventory versus paid inventory?" And so we did a study, and we did a deal with Vizu as our partner on that, and this was back in January or so of this year, and we studied brand lift. And so a very traditional metric. You don't need anything fancier than that. But brand lift on a message coming from social versus paid, and we found, of course, that there's some value in word of mouth, and you can come up with a percentage. At least we did, and you could then say, well, there's incremental value to any time you get an impression. And if I'm doing if I'm buying, I can weight the shares that go along with that buy accordingly and try to get a more efficient CPM if that's what how I'm paying. And so I don't think that it's necessarily that you need to say, we need to throw out some of the metrics. I think you need to, although some of them aren't as relevant, like the site visits you mentioned, but I think you just need to make sure that what you're assuming is provable and take some chances and ask some questions is part of your investment in all of this.
I think just adding on there, jumping in, I guess. For us, it's interesting. This may seem like a soft metric, but people do or want to do business with people. And we're an intangible good, and the only time you have a real emotional connection with Oppenheimer funds is if your portfolio is going down. It's not a really good time to want to have an emotional connection with somebody. So how do you capitalize on those really positive moments that help people want to do business with you, right? So what we're really using the channel. There are a lot of KPIs that get you to ROI, and to your point, maybe it's not a new metric, but the positive association, maybe it's not even word of mouth, but it's the positive association, it's the connection with our portfolio managers who are making these investment decisions and giving them an opportunity to share a voice or to show that they are people and to convey how they think about making the investment decisions that ultimately impact an investor's portfolio is very, very powerful for us. And being able to track some of that lift and make that connectivity is super important, because we are an intangible. You typically don't pay attention to us. You may not even know that we're in your portfolio, depending on how active you are in looking at your 401k statement, for example. And so you know the brand if you're of a certain age. Maybe not the younger generation, but we're working on that, which is one reason why we're in social. But if you can have a positive association beyond just did my portfolio do better because I'm in Oppenheimer funds or not, we can capitalize on some of those more positive moments.
I think in the area of relationships, which you kind of teed this off with. I mean, I actually like what you said about. We don't necessarily need new metrics. We need to know how to map what we're doing to ones we've kind of demonstrated a value for over time. I do think in the case of when we talk about lifetime customer value, a kind of a value I associate largely with CRM, but I don't know that that's so narrow. But when we start thinking about CRM and valuing the programs that we're doing there, lifetime customer value is one of those KPIs. And all I would think now, all that we're doing now is we're trying to maybe strengthen the definition of that now, because we put a value on not just the purchase potential for a lifetime purchase potential for that particular customer, or repurchase, what have you, but it's their advocacy, right? It's their word of mouth, their ability, possibly customer get customer. I mean, it depends upon the business and what we're talking about. And how do we factor that in so that we do not just put the right value on them, but also reward them, of course, for being for demonstrating a lot of really valuable, loyal behavior. So I think there is some room for kind of newness in what we're putting out there, and that's the thing I see most of our clients struggling with. It's so cool that you did the study, because the X factor in all of these programs is that I see everyone wrestling with is intuitively we believe in the power of word of mouth. That it cannot adequately be compared with an advertising impression because of the implicit additional trust in general in some of the forms of word of mouth, not all, but some. And we just, there's no manageable way, because it's so context specific, it's so complicated. You have to do that study and treat it as a heuristic from now on. We did a pretty good study. It's going to inform our work. I'm sure in 6 months to a year, we're going to come up with a reason why that's not adequate, and we'll do another one, and so forth. Right. But I think that the value of that utterance is the thing. The way that people try to use, some people, you see this in case studies all the time, and agency side, we're the worst offender, right? You see it in, when they tell you the advertising value equivalency for all of their word of mouth, and it's like, oh, Jesus Christ, man, that's like probably devaluing the program by half, because an advertising impression cannot possibly be the same value as me telling you what restaurant you ought to go to tonight because I had such an awesome experience. So, I don't know, some of the things we're wrestling with.
Great, thank you guys. I do want to take some time to open it up to the audience for questions. We have some folks with mics coming around.
Hi, I actually have two questions for Paul. First of all, I love GE. The reason why is because when I did my master, they asked us to do financial analysis for GE, which I thought was crazy. So coming to my question, how do you actually do content with GE, with such a large organization?
You've quickly determined the value of an internal reporter. And it's something that an agency can sort of help with, but you really need people who are out there turning over every rock in the company or the country to get those stories out. I don't know what's going on with that, but anyhow, and it's probably not play well in the press. But anyhow, to get those stories out there, because once you kind of frankly get hooked on people interested in what our plant looks like via Instagram, or excited by a very kind of consumer-friendly video of a turboprop engine, you want to find more of those stories.
I have a follow-up. So, how actually do you sell it to your leaders? Because everybody knows like Facebook, Twitter, and everything, but there are so much out there.
I think, if I look back now and say that, had I told, Beth Comstock and Jeff Immelt that we would be tweeting some of the stuff that we tweet back when I said we're going to do this, I would not be here today. So I think you need to frame it. We're lucky we've got with Beth an incredible leader who understands the value of this. I think you need to tie it back to existing ways of communication. John, I'm sure, has a number of tips on this that help round out the organization. It also helps, for better or worse, to have either a competitor or a meaningful brand challenge that you can address. But I think ultimately, you need to start that out, and you need to start slowly and find your voice.
I'll add one thing about how to convince the higher-ups that you should be doing this stuff. Something that I've suggested to a few people, and they've told me that it's been successful for a few of them. A lot of times coming from you internally, they don't want to hear it. So find a really good book that explains it, and then subtly leave it on their desk. Don't tell them that you left it. Just like the book just shows up in their desk one day, right? And then hopefully they read the book, and then like, well, this is a really good idea. And then they'll come down to your office and be like, we really should be doing all, and you're like, wow, I've been trying to tell you this for like 3 months, right? But sometimes it needs that outside influence. But find a book that talks about this stuff, whether it's the inbound marketing book or 6 Degrees of Separation, or there's dozens of books that talk about this stuff, and just subtly leave it, because sometimes those people need to feel like it was their idea. And that's one that's worked for a few people I know.
So we have time for one more question.
Hey, maybe for John or Paul, what third-party attribution tools are you using, if any? And how are you tying in social and SEM into first touch or other ways of measuring it?
What was the second part of the question, sorry?
Search engine marketing?
Yeah,
SEM
SEM and social. How are you measuring first touch, and how are you tying that into purchase behavior or decision?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Well, all right. So first one was third-party attribution tool or third-party tools. In general.
Are there any third-party tools that you guys are currently using?
Sure. I mean, we use a lot of the tools that we have always used. If we're trying to understand the kind of efficacy of our content marketing part of our program, then we're putting in omniture tags into content and seeing where it goes and how it does actually lead to driving traffic to a certain URL and so forth and so on. Clearly, in the preference space, in that middle space I've been describing before, we use a lot of different listening tools, from Radian 6 to Crimson Hexagon to Visible Tech and so forth and so on, whatever's most appropriate in there, and that gives us the ability to do that. As I said, in some cases we're using self-reporting technologies to understand what pools of people are doing out there in the marketplace. I think search in general, not just paid search is SEM, but SEO is a big factor in what we do, especially SEO, for instance. I mean, increasing because we use it 2 ways. One is we mine search just like we mine conversations. What are people searching for? That causes us to create content, not just to rig it up with a whole bunch of meta information, but find out what videos are people really looking for, in relation to what IBM sells, and then create those videos. Therefore, no matter how well they're constructed, to be shareable and so forth and so on, they'll still find the home, they'll find the customer better because they address that. So we use it that way, and obviously, we're also expecting that SEO, that people are using Google, all the time, right? It's the way we all start our sessions online. But now people are going there not just to find out not just to find out what Ford says about the Ford Fusion, but what a Ford Fusion hybrid owner, happy one at that, will say about the car and tell you out there. So that's a big factor for us. Now, SEM, for me, that's just about extending the ability to extend the reach of a particular program. And we're just as likely to pump. I think the interesting change in SEM and or any other of the paid models, like in what we do in Facebook with sponsored stories, is now we're pumping content down through the channel. It's a little bit different at SEM because it's very discrete, but now we're pumping conversations and content down through the channel to draw them back into it, not necessarily to just get an impression or get a click through to what we used to think was valuable, like a website visit or something like that.
From my perspective, I think at the high end, with all the knobs and dials and the most expensive, most configurable systems, I think you're talking about something like an Omniture and something like a Radian 6, and then some sort of a CRM system and then you need to figure out how to tie all those together. At the lowest, like cheapest, easiest, it's like you can just like ask people, like, how did you hear about us, either on your web form or with the salesperson or whatever. And then somewhere in the middle, I think there's a lot of emerging platforms that are more integrated that do kind of basically a middle road solution where it's less expensive, much easier, but gives you some of the sophistication of those more complicated platforms. And there's some company, Hubspot, that does something like that I would put in that category. And I'll be quiet now.
Well, I want to thank all of you so much for coming and sharing your insights and thoughts with us today, and thank all of you for attending this session. We're going to stop here, and are we going to break?
We're going to go break 15 minutes.
Okay, 15-minute break, and then we'll be back in here for the afternoon sessions.